Is Linda Mansfield, and I wrote Stories for the 12 Days of Christmas. It's a fictional but realistic collection of 13 short stories set at Christmas time. You can get more information at lindamansfieldbooks.com, Linda Mansfield Author on Facebook, or Restart LM Author on Twitter. Sometimes people ask me how I get ideas for the stories that I write. Well, this story that I'm going to read today is the 5th story in the book. It's called "And Goodwill to All Men." And the story idea came from this outdoor decoration I found on the clearance rack at an after Christmas sale one year. It lights up and says peace, but that's all it says. I think it was on the clearance rack because the words "on earth" had been damaged, and so they couldn't sell them. I think I paid all of $1 for it. But anyway, that generated the idea for this story called "And Goodwill to All Men." Minerva Stewart made the best apple pie in all of Cumberland County, maybe even in all of Pennsylvania. It wasn't a boast, it was a fact. She'd made at least a dozen apple pies for the annual Christmas bazaar at Sunnyside Methodist Church every year since she was 15. She turned 79 in July, so that was at least 880 apple pies. Due to high demand, her contributions were never displayed with the other baked goods in the church's fellowship hall. Minerva's pies were always pre-ordered through a sign-up sheet posted outside the church office the Sunday before the bazaar. Each year, all 12 pies were spoken for before the choir walked down the aisle to begin the 10:30 a.m. service. It had always been that way. Tradition, you see, was important at Sunnyside Methodist Church. So this Saturday morning, Minerva scurried around her kitchen preparing the ingredients for the recipe she, and only she, knew by heart. Once she had agreed to let her 12-year-old granddaughter, Wanda, watch her bake, because Wanda wanted to follow in her grandmother's footsteps, at least in the kitchen. Wanda tried to intercept the ingredients and measure them before they went into Minerva's big blue mixing bowl. But the effort was a dismal failure because Minerva never measured anything. She simply poured this and that into her concoction, spread out her crust on a large marble slab that had been her grandmother's, and the pies emerged from the gas oven an hour later, as delicious as they'd always been. Nobody ever thought this would change, least of all Minerva. The crust for the first round of pies came out flaky and buttery, and Minerva was ready to mix the main ingredients for the filling, which included both white and brown sugar, when the phone rang. It was Judy Wilson, who had known Minerva all her life. She asked Minerva to bring some big spoons to church for the bazaar. They always needed more spoons when serving lunch out of the big crock pots at the lunch stand. Minerva readily agreed and then went back to her baking, humming a Christmas carol as she worked. She had to make the pies in 3 different batches, because although her oven was big, it could only hold 4 pies at a time. When the first 4 pies came out of the oven, they looked a little different than usual, but Minerva failed to realize that she had omitted the white sugar after she was distracted by Judy's phone call. The second round of pies seemed much better, although Minerva forgot to add the lemon zest after she stopped for a spot of tea. The third batch was the most troubling. Although she'd focused solely on the task at hand, Minerva somehow forgot to add almost half of the required all-purpose flour. Oh, they'll be okay. They're always okay, Minerva thought, as she put the last 4 pies on the table in the sun porch to cool. After another cup of tea, Minerva was ready for her next task. This one was harder, but she wanted to do it for her husband, Ralph, who had died unexpectedly in February of a heart attack. For years, Ralph had put a Christmas display on their barn's tallest silo. Since the farm was situated at the top of one of the biggest hills in the county, The display could be seen for miles in the rolling countryside. It, too, was tradition. So Minerva bundled up in her work jacket and jammed Ralph's favorite red plaid cap over her tight gray curls. She pulled on her gloves, tucked a scarf under her jacket, and trundled out to the steer barn to get the big ladder that waited in the cobwebs behind the heavy, sliding double door. The display, which came in 3 sections, would be waiting in the hayloft just above the door. Minerva found the ladder. The 3 wire forms covered in fake pine garland and lights were where they were supposed to be. She positioned the ladder against the side of the silo, tried not to think about how high she had to climb, and started up. The first tricky part was maneuvering from her ladder onto the bottom of the metal ladder that was attached to the side of the silo. Minerva took a deep breath and stepped onto the bottom of the silo's ladder, holding all 3 sections of the display in her right hand as she clung to the ladder with her left hand. She climbed and climbed, and then she climbed some more. It took a while because it was a 200-foot silo, and the nails for the display were about halfway up. She passed the bottom set of nails for the 3rd section of the display, and she was relieved that they were holding firm in the concrete. She passed the 2nd set of nails without snagging her clothing on them, and she was quite proud about how things were going. It was hard, but everyone she knew enjoyed this display every Christmas, and she couldn't let them down. She held on tight to the ladder with one hand and settled the 1st section of the display over its nails. She almost cheered when it was straight on the 1st try. The 2nd section was a little harder, and she felt a little dizzy once, but she got it up too. That's when she noticed the big black steer looking up at her. "Why, hello there," she yelled down to the steer. "What are you looking at?" It never occurred to her that the sight of a 79-year-old woman hanging with one hand onto the side of a concrete silo more than 100 feet up in the air would be awe-inspiring to all creatures, including a cow. Minerva wondered which steer it was. There were only a few left on the farm, but she'd known most of them since they were calves, and she had given them all names. Unfortunately, the distraction of the steer was enough to cause her to forget to connect the electrical plugs of the 2nd and 3rd sections of the display. In her effort to keep her balance, she didn't realize the mistake. The 3rd section installed, she slowly made her way back down the silo's ladder. She was pleased to see that her 1st ladder hadn't shifted from where she'd left it. She slowly made the transition and was quite pleased with herself when she plugged in the electrical cord and set the timer for the display to come on promptly at 7 p.m. "How's that, Michael?" she thought smugly. Michael was her only son and Wanda's father. They'd had words right after Ralph died when he first suggested that she sell the farm and move into a condo down by the river. They'd had an actual argument about it when he nagged her about it again at Thanksgiving. She knew Christmas wouldn't stop his crusade, but she wasn't ready to move off the farm just yet. About 3 days after the bazaar, the hushed conversation started, after the pie purchasers partook of their desserts. It was downright shocking to even suggest it, but the truth was this year Minerva's pies were not quite right. Was anything the matter with Minerva? As Minerva's longtime friend, Judy was appointed to broach the subject. "Minerva, dear, did you do anything different with your apple pies for the bazaar this year?" Judy began. "No, they were the same as always," Minerva said. "Are you sure you didn't change the recipe?" Judy pressed on. "Recipe? There is no recipe," Minerva replied. "Is everything okay?" "Well, some of the people mentioned that they tasted a little different," Judy said. "Different? Well, I didn't do anything different," Minerva responded, and Judy dropped the subject, afraid of upsetting her old friend. Michael dropped Minerva off at church at 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve. She was an hour early, but she wanted to beat the crowd and get there early so she could get a good seat in the back. The service went as expected, as was the tradition at Sunnyside Methodist Church. The old Christmas carols were sung. Some babies were taken out of the sanctuary halfway through the service when they started to cry, and the kids' choir was as cute as ever. Most of the congregation stuck with the preacher's message until at least halfway through the sermon, which was also par for the course. Despite the beauty of the service, Minerva was still mad at her son as the ushers started down the aisles to light the candle held by the first person in each pew. Honestly, she thought he was more of an old lady than she would ever be. It's not that I couldn't be happy in town, but it's just not time yet, Minerva thought. I can still do things, even if my pies were a flop this year. The ushers slowly made their way towards the back of the church. As Minerva took the flame from her son's candle to light her own, the sad look in Michael's eyes spoke volumes. Minerva knew he didn't want to spoil her Christmas. He must really be worried about her to make such a fuss. And living in town might not be so bad. She did have a lot to take care of each day at the farm. She didn't want to move, but she also didn't want to cause trouble, especially at Christmas. On the way home in the darkened SUV, she carefully broached the subject. It might not be so bad to move into town, she said hesitantly. Judy has a condo there, and she loves it. Judy is in a club that plays rummy every Tuesday at the community center, Michael pointed out. I think you could beat them all. I'm sure I could, Minerva said confidently. I can still get things done. As the car made the turn up the lane towards the farmhouse, the Christmas lights on the silo glowed their message over the rolling fields. Michael was astonished to see them, and a stab of pure fear went up his spine as it dawned on him who put them up. Peace, the top section proclaimed. The words "on earth" couldn't be seen since their plugs had been left dangling on high. You sure can, Mom, Michael replied. Thank you.